We are joined now by Valerie Jarrett. She's a former senior advisor for President Barack Obama, and Reince Priebus, who is President Trump's former chief of staff. Reince, I want to start with you first, picking up on the Mike Pompeo story. He started the speech, Reince, as you saw, saying, I'm Susan's husband and I'm Nick's dad, but nobody could miss the fact that he also had his Mike Pompeo Secretary of State face on, and that it was a very political speech. Now, normally, you know, we don't mix up government and politics in this particular time. What did you think of him breaking the norm? Did it concern you at all?
Not really, Gail. By the way, good morning to you and Valerie and the gang. Not really. You know, the Hatch Act's kind of it's a law that makes sure that people that are political or they have a federal position, like a chief of staff like me or Valerie Jarrett, a senior counselor, that when it comes time for campaigning, that you only do that on personal time. And so it's just like the president using Air Force One, and you've had to split up the costs, and the campaign pays for part. And, you know, I think in the case of Mike Pompeo, a big part of the portfolio of Trump is going to be confronting China, Israel, trade, and all of those issues, I think, are going to be very important in this election. So Office of Legal Counsel, which is an official sort of third-party body that reviews these things, also approved it. So,
but Reince, he did.
But
he did violate his own department's policy.
Yeah, and I haven't seen that, but I do know that it's completely unconstitutional to prevent people from using their personal time if they want to be involved in politics. Just like me going to a Trump rally when I was the chief of staff. I mean, I did that. I did those things quite a bit. But we also had to account for my time in a way that was legal. And so that's really, I think, what's going on here. Now, whether they're violating their own policies, I don't know about that, but I do know what the law says. And as far as what the law says, he's fine to do it.
All right. There are some Republicans, though, who disagree with that. But, Valerie, what did you think of the impact of that speech?
Well, it wasn't just the Secretary of State doing it. It was also the fact that they held much of the ceremony in the White House, in the Rose Garden. Gail, that's totally unprecedented to do. And even further, to have gone up on the state floor and had a naturalization ceremony. No one can argue that that is anything but official business as a backdrop to a political campaign. All of this is totally unprecedented. It certainly, in my opinion, violates the Hatch Act, but certainly, if not the law, certainly the spirit. We want to separate politics from government, and that did not happen last night. It wasn't a blurring of the lines. It was an erasing of the line. Well,
it was a big night last night for Melania Trump, our First Lady, and people on both sides of the aisle say that she delivered, that, you know, it was her job, they said, to go out and humanize her husband. I'm curious about, Valerie, starting with you, what stood out to you in that speech? It was very personal.
Yes, it was, but I don't see how one speech can whitewash over the damage that her husband has done over the nearly last 4 years. And when she talks about social media, well, who has weaponized it more than her husband?
She was the first person to call the coronavirus COVID-19 as opposed to the China virus. That was notable, and she expressed support and sympathy for people who have lost their lives during the coronavirus, and that's something that we have not heard in the first 2 nights of this convention. Reince?
Well, you're exactly right, Gail.
Yeah. First of all, I think she did a superb job. Number one, she acknowledged the pandemic in a way that I thought was very human. She was reflective on race relations, which I think is really important right now, and not to mention some of the other speakers that I think were excellent when it comes to race. She was speaking directly to suburban women as well, which is really a lot of, you know, as Valerie knows, in the Rust Belt and in around these battleground states, that's really important. And she humanized her husband at the end of the speech. So, I mean, she did hit it out of the park. I do think the Republicans are going to get a bump here. And as far as the Hatch Act is concerned, all of those things have been approved by Office of Legal Counsel, and the Democrats aren't going to win debating the Hatch Act. I promise you that.
Reince, in both nights of this convention, the Republicans have painted a pretty rosy picture of how they've dealt with the coronavirus. We have 178,000 dead, however. Larry Kudlow even referred to it in the past tense. Do you think there's a risk that people will see that things aren't over and maybe things aren't so good?
Well, again, I refer you back to Melania Trump's speech. I think her tone, I would tell you, I think that's the tone needed at the RNC, is exactly what Melania Trump did in her speech. And yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that the coronavirus is probably the #1 issue on the ballot. And second to that is the economy. And I think ultimately it's going to be a very tight race. People have strong feelings about both of those issues. And that's what it's going to come down to. But so far this week, I think the RNC has done a pretty fabulous job in diversity and in tackling these topics, right, and building up their candidate, okay, which is what they need to do.
All right, Reince Priebus, Valerie Jarrett, thank you both for being with us this morning.